Order, order. I call on Elliot Colburn to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holborn. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered special educational needs in Carshalton and Wallington, including the special educational needs provision at the London Borough of Sutton and its arm-length company, Cognos. Mr. Hollowbone, every child deserves access to good education and the support that they are entitled to have the best start in life. But for too many children and their families in Carshalton and Wallington, getting access to this is a daily fight because of a Lib Dem-run council that just does not seem to care about the most vulnerable children living in our borough. Every single week at my surgery, I have a parent or a carer or a family member come to me to raise complaints about getting their child access to the support that they are entitled to when fighting for an education. And they've told me and they show me the countless emails, meetings, phone calls that they've had back and forth with Cognos and even with counsellors responsible for running this service. And yet I hear the same story week on week. Messages are going ignored, support gets refused, and parents are having to be left escalating cases up to the tribunal and or the ombudsman in order to get support. And the problems with SEN provision in Sutton have been well documented. In 2018, concerns were raised by the Care Quality Commission about Sutton SEN's department and by Ofsted, which delivered a damning inspection report. The report found that there had been insufficient progress made on implementing the 2014 reforms, poor communication, and over-optimistic self-evaluation, amongst other issues. It was estimated that approximately 700 children were unlawfully rejected for education, health and care plans, or EHCP assessments, since 2015. 700 children. In any other council, at the very least, the lead member would have resigned, but all have remained in post, and the same councillor remains in charge of this service today. And what was the Lib Dems' response to this Ofsted report? No humility, no shame, no remorse for the pain that they had caused children and their families. Instead, they called for Ofsted to be abolished. Since 2018, the council has claimed that it's improved its service, that Cognos is working well, and that it has the backing of the majority of parents in the borough. But this just isn't reflected in any sense of reality if you speak to parents in Carshalton and Wallington. And it was around this time that a local mum, Hayley Harding, set up the Sutton EHCP Crisis Group and has amassed the backing of hundreds of local parents and families who have been through similar situations as her. And I want to pay tribute to Hayley, and I know that my honourable friend, the member for Sutton Cheam and Worcester Park, who's the MP that Hayley represents, would also like to pay tribute to Hayley and to the hundreds of other campaigners who have been battling for their children to receive access to the support that they are entitled to. But the struggle to get EHCPs continues for many parents since 2018, in spite of what the council might claim. Sutton Council and Cognos have been the subject of many local and national media scandals since 2018, most notably when Sutton shamefully appeared on a BBC Panorama expose in 2020. Did this spark a change in attitudes at the council and Cognos? I'm afraid it didn't, and the fight for parents continued. Then last year, a shocking set of leaked Cognos board minutes were obtained, and the unredacted copies reveal a shocking truth. Not only was Cognos in a dire financial situation, showing a loss of £717,000 a year, despite Sutton consistently appearing as one of the, if not the highest, funded borough for SEND, but the council was aiming to save money by cancelling around 200 children's EHCPs by the end of the year. Did this revelation start the winds of change for parents? No. The unredacted minutes were there for the world to see, and yet the council and Cognos denied their contents. And let me just emphasise this point. Printed, official minutes were obtained, and the response from the council and from Cognos was to deny what was printed within them was true. This is absolutely shocking. And then we come to 2022, 4 years on from the Ofsted report, and it appears that there's been absolutely no lessons learned. Just a few months ago, the Department for Education's own figures showed that Sutton once again was found to be the highest rejecter of families applying for EHCP assessments in the country. almost half of all children were rejected. To put that in perspective, the national average is just 23%. And this comes right back round to what the Ofsted report in 2018 initially found, which particularly took aim at the leadership of the service. In other words, the Lib Dem councillors in charge of running it. And since 2018, I have seen countless examples of the council setting itself against parents and families of children with special educational needs and disabilities. Not only do parents struggle to get an EHCP issued in the first place, but then the plans that are issued are often completely inadequate. Parents, for example, have come to me and shown me what is quite obviously a copy and pasted EHCP plan, and many of them haven't even bothered to change the child's name from the other plan it was copied with. So the wrong child is named on the plan, let alone having the wrong support within it. So this leaves parents and families spending months and even years fighting with the council and fighting with Cognos, all the way up to a tribunal and or the ombudsman to get what they deserve. And this isn't just a group of parents which is deliberately trying to make trouble for the council, because the figures show that around 90% of all cases are found in the parents' favour. So whilst the council is wasting taxpayers' money, taking families through expensive proceedings like this, rather than issuing them the support that they are entitled to, the children are left in the middle of all of this, not getting access to the support that they need. Now, this is a real mark of shame on Sutton, and it cannot be allowed to continue. And if councils like Sutton are going to continue to turn against families of children with SEND, then the frameworks must be in place to support the families. Now, I know the government recognises this, which is why they conducted a review into SEND. And I have just a few questions for the Minister about how the SEND review will support families of children with SEND in places like Carshalton and Wallington. Particularly how the SEND review will make it easier for families to raise disputes and have them resolved more quickly. What mechanisms will be put in place to ensure councils comply with their statutory obligations, and how overall the SEND review aims to change the negative experience many families have of fighting for their children's education. Mr Hollowbone, children really do deserve the best possible start in life, so I look forward to hearing how the government can help us achieve just that.
The question is that this House has considered SEND services in Carshalton and Wallington, and the debate can last until 11:30. Minister.
Well, Mr Hollowbone, thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And firstly, let me thank my honourable friend for securing this important debate on special educational needs in his constituency of Carshalton and Wallington, and of course the London Borough of Sutton more generally. And let me start by saying I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend when he says that every child deserves access to a good education. In fact, I'd go further and say a world-class education. And it concerns me greatly to hear how many children in his constituency are having to, along with their parents, having to fight the system just to get their child or young person the support that they rightly deserve. And that's not right. And I'll say a bit more about how we plan to change the system, and in particular the adversarial nature of the system, which he pointed out in my response. Now, my honourable friend raised the poor implementation of the 2014 reforms in Sutton. He's right to do so, although it is not an issue that is exclusive to Sutton, sadly, and I'll come on to that in a moment. My honourable friend also references the work of local mum, Hayley Harding, who is, I agree with my honourable friend, inspirational. I've had the pleasure to have met with her, and I very much join my honourable friend in paying tribute to Hayley for the important work that she does, supporting other parents and campaigning for change in this area. And I can assure my honourable friend that I have certainly listened, and I very much hope that the SEND Green Paper, which I'll come to in a few moments, reflects that listening exercise. My honourable friend talked about the struggle to get EHCPs, and he's right to raise this, and I'll say more about our proposed changes as part of the review in a moment. And my honourable friend concluded with a number of important questions about the SEND review and the Green Paper, which I will now address. But before I do, and not wanting to in any way embarrass my honourable friend, I think it's important that his Carshalton and Wallington constituents know how hard and passionately my honourable friend has campaigned on this issue, and how, to be frank, Mr. Holliman, I can't walk down a corridor in Westminster and pass my honourable friend without him raising either a local send case or this issue more generally. And I do appreciate that I'm biased on this issue, but in my own view, a council's greatest responsibility is to its children, and in particularly to the most vulnerable and disadvantaged children, which is why the testimony that he gave today around Sutton depresses me greatly, and why we need to change the system. I also know, Mr. Holliman, how hard my honourable friend works on ensuring every child in his constituency, and of course across Sutton more generally, working alongside local MPs, how hard he works to ensure that they have access to that world-class education that they deserve. And I certainly commit to continuing to work with him to hold Sutton Council to account and ensure that they're treating the education of vulnerable and disadvantaged children as seriously as I know he and indeed I do. Now, turning to my honourable friend's specific points and the questions that he raises. Initially, I'll cover funding, as although my honourable friend and indeed parents will want to hear more about our ambitious plans for reform of send and alternative provision more generally within the Green Paper, I'm conscious they will also be concerned about the here and now, especially if they have children that are currently, children with send who are currently in the education system. Importantly, we're increasing the high needs budget for children and young people with the most complex needs by £1 billion this year, so 2022-23. That brings it to a total investment of £9.1 billion. And this unprecedented increase comes on top of £1.5 billion increase over the past 2 years. Now, turning specifically to the London Borough of Sutton, Sutton will attract an increase of 12.5% per head of their 2 to 18 population this year compared to the previous financial year's allocation. And that brings their total high needs funding allocation in 2022-23 to £52.6 million. Now, alongside that is our capital investment programme, as we very much recognise the need for more special school places. So we've secured £2.6 billion, Mr. Holliman, to build or create around 33,000 additional send places. And we're pump priming that, if you like, so we're investing early. So £1.4 billion of that is going to be spent this year via allocation. And although we don't have exact figures for Sutton, I'm conscious that there is a need for special places across London, and I'll be able to update my honourable friend at a later date as to those plans. Now, turning now to the send review in the Green Paper, and I'll briefly touch on why these reforms are so desperately needed. My honourable friend has already set out many of the reasons, but firstly, it's about outcomes. At present, it's just not acceptable. And it's not acceptable that we have too many children and young people with send that, to be frank, are falling behind their peers. Meeting with parents, carers, children and young people with send, they tell me that too often they feel unsupported by the system, both locally and nationally. And as my honourable friend mentioned in his speech, too many parents feel that they have to fight and fight and fight just to get their child or children the education and support that they deserve. They tell me that the system's too adversarial, and this isn't helped by the culture within local authorities, as my honourable friend set out in relation to Sutton, especially when it comes to tribunals, as he pointed out. I'm told of a lack of send support in mainstream settings and needs not being identified and met early enough, that there's a postcode lottery, that there are, as we know, significant local authority deficits. There's a lack of join-up between local health systems and the education system. And also insufficient clarity on what parents and children should be entitled to, and as my honourable friend again pointed out, poor accountability and redress mechanisms within the system, meaning parents feel powerless. Now, all of the above and more is why the government committed to the send review in September of 2019. And despite a delay largely caused by the pandemic, the Green Paper was published in the first quarter of this year. The consultation is now live, and we've extended the deadline for submissions to the 22nd of July, and I would encourage everyone to take part in that consultation. Although we've set out a clear plan, an aspiration and ambition, we really need those who have lived experience and experience of send up and down our country to take part and ensure that we get it right. Now, my honourable friend asked rightly, given the negative experiences of his constituents and the issues he and indeed I have just set out, how will the Green Paper and the review bring about the change that we all so desperately want to see? So my aim is to create a more inclusive education system with excellent local mainstream provision, which will improve the experience and outcome for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, and of course also, and importantly, those who need alternative provision. So how do we intend to achieve this? Well, at its heart, it's about ensuring that every child gets the right support in the right place at the right time, tailored to their individual needs. So we're going to establish a single national send and alternative provision system, setting out clear standards, and they're going to be underpinned by the introduction of a national framework. We're going to provide targeted support for children and young people where it's required. We're going to make available, using that £2.6 billion, excellent specialist provision and alternative provision support for those children who do have those more complex needs. We're going to be setting out clear roles, responsibilities and accountability measures. We're going to standardise and digitise education and healthcare plans, making them more accessible for parents and those who advocate and support them. We're going to strengthen mediation arrangements so individuals with their local authorities can work through those disagreements at an earlier stage, trying to take that adversarial nature out of the system. And we're going to establish new SEND partnerships at a local level, which will require local areas to co-produce with parents locally an inclusion plan. We're going to introduce new local and national inclusion dashboards that will strengthen accountability and transparency. And importantly, we're going to improve initial teacher training, as every teacher is a teacher of SEND, but many tell me that they don't feel confident as a teacher of SEND. And if we are going to identify early and get children and young people the support they need as early as possible, that starts with really highly skilled teachers who have the confidence to teach those with SEND. And we're going to introduce a new SEND NPQ to help us with that. And as I mentioned earlier, this is backed up by our £2.6 billion capital investment programme. And importantly, learning from the lessons of the 2014 reforms. And the ambition and aspiration of the 2014 reforms were right, but the implementation was sadly poor. And that was evidenced in my honourable friend's speech, because we know that the implementation in Sutton was nowhere near as good as it should have been, and sadly that is something we see replicated in other local authorities up and down the country, which is why we're determined to get implementation right as part of these reforms, and we're investing an additional £70 million specifically for implementation. Again, Ms Holborn, I just repeat, because it's really important, that the consultation is now open and is live until the 22nd of July. I'd encourage as many people as possible to take part, and it's available on gov.uk. And finally, as my honourable friend rightly focused on accountability, especially local authorities, we've commissioned the CQC and Ofsted, with the support of the Department for Health and Social Care, to develop a new area SEND inspection framework, which will launch in early 2023. And the overarching aim there is to give a greater role to the views and experiences of children and young people with SEND, and of course those of their parents and carers. And the public consultation for that is currently also live and can be found online or through Ofsted. So, Mr Holborn, in closing, let me thank my honourable friend for the support that he has given to this incredibly important agenda today. He's raised important concerns, and I know that I and the government, I hope that he knows that I and the government are not just dedicated but determined to continue to listen to children and young people with SEND, their parents, their carers, and all those who advocate for them in the system. And I hope that he feels assured that the work is underway and that he feels confident that we are committed to delivering changes within the SEND system, both locally and nationally, so that every child and young person across our country, regardless of the challenges they face, are able to achieve their full potential.
The question is that this House has considered SEND services in Carshalton and Wallington